Okay, is this on? I'm told the signal that we're starting is me starting. So we are now live. This is it. Welcome to Indiana Landmarks and Indiana Automotive's Talking Track event. It is great to see the folks here in person again in this gorgeous building that's the Indiana Landmarks offices. And for the thousands that are watching at home on Zoom, thank you for spending some time with us this evening. We've got a great program lined up for everybody, and we're thrilled to be here. I'm Dave Wilson. I have the honor of serving as one of the volunteer board members of Indiana Automotive, which is a subgroup of Indiana Landmarks. As you know, Indiana Landmarks is involved in the preservation and advocacy for great places in our great state. And the automotive group has a special affinity for the historic places that have a great automotive history, such as the Stutz factory, or the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. You may have heard of a little automotive test track out there in the Speedway that we'll hear more about tonight. So the membership, in addition to the money from the membership, the additional $20 that it takes to be an automotive group member, and some of the event revenue goes towards advocating for and supporting landmarks around our state that need help. A couple instances are we've supported the Aubrey Cord Duesenberg Museum with a grant for structural assessment. We've worked with a local company to restore and have recommended the Duesenberg sign that's on the actual Duesenberg factory here in Indianapolis, and a few Indiana Racing Memorial Association markers, like the Newport Hill Climb, and coming up this summer, the Whiteland Raceway go-karting track, now owned by our good friends Sarah Fisher and Andy O'Gara. So every day, all year long, Indiana Landmarks works to revitalize historic structures that give our communities visible connections to the past. And once a year, Landmarks comes up with a 10 most endangered list that are on the brink of extinction and are too important to these communities to lose. The current entries include one of the state's first high schools built exclusively for Black students, a groundbreaking mid-century hospital, and a pre-Civil War brewery building. So once a year, there's a fundraiser involved to raise money to help save these and other endangered landmarks with the Auction to the Rescue, which the silent auction is going on now. You can bid online up and through Thursday the 21st, and then at 7 o'clock on Thursday the 21st, the always amazing and ever entertaining President Marsh Davis will be online with to auction off some incredible experiences and one-of-a-kind items. So be sure to tune in to that. In addition to some of the speaker events we've had in the past, and like tonight, some of the events the Indiana Automotive Group has done has been some great automotive tours where we've been able to go to communities around the state, get some behind-the-scenes tours of museums, take a peek at some private collections that are not open to the public. If you joined us a few years ago, we were in Auburn, which was a great event, and the year before that, we were down in French Lick with some fantastic private collections. And this year, we are thrilled finally after 2 years of talking about it, to be able to return to that with a city with great automotive heritage in South Bend, where we've worked with our incredible board members, Sue Kennedy and Jessica Kramer, who's on staff here at Landmarks, put together these tours. They're amazing. And we'll spend July 15th and 16th looking at a private auto collection of meticulously restored automobiles from the brass, vintage, and pre-war classic eras. We'll take a look at the Studebaker assembly plant, and more. So for those of you that have been on these, it's a great time, great camaraderie. Bring your favorite car and get a chance to see different parts of that have made a big impact on our automotive heritage. Speaking of our President Marsh Davis and Indiana Automotive and these great events, about 3 years ago, the board and Marsh met with the folks at the Indiana State Fair, who, as you know, has a featured theme each year, and we talked to them a little bit about the idea of the Indiana's automotive heritage as a theme. And they said, great, we've got a few in the queue right now, so we'll talk to you. And pandemic hits, and this past year, they came back and went, sounds great, let's do it right now, 2022, let's do it. And so it is on. As you may have seen last week, the fair announced that their theme is celebrating Indiana's automotive excellence. So They're going to have an incredible theme of cars. They've asked Indiana Automotive to curate a special display of Indiana-made and manufactured passenger cars. And you will see in the Harvest Pavilion during the fair when it opens at the end of July, an incredible collection of amazing Duesenberg Stutz, Revere, Waverly. We've worked with the museums and private owners around the state to bring together an incredible collection that represents Indiana's incredible heritage. So I hope you'll join us at the State Fair for this great display. We may not be talking about Indiana's automotive heritage if it weren't for local businessmen Carl Fisher, James Allison, Arthur Newby, and Frank Wheeler. When they pulled their resources to build an automotive testing ground in 1909, a few miles from here, it changed the trajectory of the industry and our city and our state. Tonight, we're honored to have two great guests here to talk about that test track, now more commonly known as the greatest spectacle in racing, and talk about its lasting impact and the future impact it has as history gets made each day, every year. Doug Boles was named president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Corporation in 2013 and heads daily operations for the historic Brickyard and all world-class racing events that are held there, including the Indianapolis 500 presented by Gamebridge, the GMR IndyCar Grand Prix, the NASCAR IndyCar doubleheader, and the Indy 8-hour sports car endurance race. So there's a few things happening out there. In fact, the Speedway in a normal year hosts approximately 275 event days of activity. So it is a year-round operation promoting automotive history and state and innovation. Jason Vansickle is the Vice President of Curation and Education at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. He graduated as a genius young pup from IUPUI with a bachelor's degree in American history and a focus on automotive history. He worked as a docent and tour guide during college at the Delara IndyCar factory and at the IMS Museum, and was hired as an exhibit specialist right after graduation. Promoted to the curator of vehicles in 2018, he is now also the vice president, as I said, overseeing education programs and curation of the museum's great exhibits, and manages a diverse collection of more than 200 vehicles and 70,000 non-vehicle artifacts related to Indiana's great history. So tonight, if you'll please join me in welcoming Doug Boles and Jason Vansickle to the stage. We'll have them talk a little bit. We'll take some questions at the end and have a great evening. Thank you. All right.
I think I'm supposed to tell jokes for a minute. Microphone on so the Zoom folks can watch. But first of all, who's ready for what happens 40 days from now, right? 106 running the Indy 500. The scary part of that for me is that 3 weeks from Friday or 24 days from now, we are on track for the first day of practice for the Grand Prix of Indianapolis. So we are just around the corner from Indianapolis. And yes, it snowed yesterday in Indianapolis. So that makes, May is coming. But thank you for having us tonight. I'm really excited to be here because I get to be with Jason. If you guys don't know Jason, there's not anybody, maybe other than Donald, who's unfortunately for us decided he's going to hibernate and retire, although we do try and call him once a week and encourage him. I know Joe Hale over here who runs the museum does it as well. We're going to get Donald back, but nobody really knows our history, especially as it relates to the cars and the way it connects to our community like Jason. So I'm as excited, I think, as all of you to spend some time with Jason talking about Indiana automotive history. And then we'll try and tie some fun stuff around motorsports and the Speedway. And then we'll take some Q&A. Happy to talk about anything that we talk about here or anything else. So I think we're both pretty transparent. So you going to sit first or am I sitting?
Yeah, I can sit first.
All right, so let's go.
So, no,
but thank you for having us.
Thank you. Obviously, as we're going into the month of May, it feels like it was just December 25th, just a few days ago. And I bet you have the same opinion on that. It just flies by and it's amazing. But after, the last few months, it is great to be able to say we're going to have fans at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and racing on the track, and hopefully a great warm summer day after a day of snow yesterday. So I appreciate your time, taking the time to join Landmarks and talk about something that I think we both love, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and 500. So, and thank all you guys for coming out today and getting geared up for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and 500. First off, obviously, Indiana Landmarks, our goal is to preserve this culture, this touch point, not only the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but the automotive heritage. And it's easy to forget, but there's remnants all over the city and the state that Indianapolis and Indiana had over 300 thriving automotive manufacturers. And that, like Dave mentioned, they had influence in the Speedway too. So a little bit, I want to start talking about Carl Fisher and someone that's close to us. I could talk about Carl all day, and I know you have too. Just an amazing man, Hoosier native, the P.T. Barnum coming out of Southern Indiana, and really developing a place that we all love, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And you have the opportunity to sit in the same role as him and guide, just like Fisher did, guide the Motor Speedway going forward. How is that?
So every day when I walk into the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, first of all, I can't believe I get a chance to work there. And I'm such a fan of the place and grew up loving the Indianapolis Motor Speedway that a couple things always go through my mind. The first one is I'm going to use my day to continue to try and make the Speedway better for fans. But through social media, the thing I love to do is try and give behind the scenes what's going on in the Speedway that as a fan, I know people would appreciate. And then that's the second thing that goes through my mind is the Speedway was a place where my dad and I bonded around it. And I fell in love with the Speedway because my dad loved the Speedway. And then the third thing that goes through my mind is the people that came before, especially somebody like Carl Fisher. And I think people give Carl a lot of credit for starting the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but you said it, he was a P.T. Barnum. So it wasn't just about promoting or building a facility to give our automotive manufacturers of the day an opportunity to go out and really showcase their wares and compete against each other. Because, you know, you got outside of the center of the city, that was hard to find roads. So this was an opportunity to put something together so people could test. But for him, it was also, how do I engage fans? How do we sell tickets? Because he loved to sell tickets. He'd been a bicycle racer and a bicycle salesman, and a car salesman, all these things that he got to do. But then I think the other piece about him that we don't give him credit for, he cared about his community. And we're Indiana. We don't have mountains, we don't have oceans, but we have these unbelievable people and spirit in this community. And he created a facility so that we could showcase Indianapolis and Hoosiers to the international community. And I think you saw him, he did that in Miami as well when he goes and he ultimately develops Miami Beach, the Lincoln Highway. You think about all the things that Carl Fisher did, but I think he loved this community so much. And building the Indianapolis Motor Speedway was as much about community. Now, most of us in this room love the Indy 500 for its history and tradition, right? That's what makes it so special. And so when we kind of step out and we do crazy things like create a snake pit that most of us know isn't really a snake pit, right? There was one snake pit, now we have this fake snake pit. And I'll get feedback sometimes from people say, you can't do that, you can't do that. And I stop and I think, what would Carl Fisher think? I think, first of all, he'd be surprised we're still around, second, and be pretty proud that we're here. But I think he'd also say, you know what? Go promote. That's what I do. I did crazy stuff. People thought I was crazy. So part of what I think I have to do every day is think about how do we step up a little bit and in Carl Fisher's spirit, promote the Indianapolis 500 and really the Speedway, which means doing sometimes things that fall outside of what you and I, all of us, might think of as really our what's really in our DNA, which was for lots of us 30 days in May, and that was it, right? And now we do all these other things. So it's 275 days. Sometimes feels a little strange, but I think Carl will be okay with it.
Well, you know, he was bringing new ideas and new activities. The Gasville Balloon Race, the first ever competitive race, the motorcycles that showed back up about 99 years later with MotoGP and then Moto America.
First aviation meet.
First aviation meet. You know, I was telling a story earlier about Carl's dealership days. And he had a promotion, which really one of the many, besides, you know, having a jar of bees. And if you would guess how many bees were in the jar, you got a free bicycle frame, or throwing cars off roofs or bicycles and running from the cops and riding. He rode a 2-story bicycle down Washington Street. But one of the things he did that in 1904, he had a buddy, George Bumball, and he was a aeronaut. And Fisher was like the 26th person to get their aeronautical license in the United States. And he wanted to do something wild to promote Stoddard Dayton, the non-Indiana car. He did sell Indiana cars at his dealership, but he was kind of fond of Stoddard Dayton out in Dayton, Ohio. But he wanted to use the car as the gondola for the hot air balloon. So with George Bumball, they built this big balloon that said Stoddard Dayton, and they one, you know, nice summer Indianapolis day, flew. Carl was in the car, driving the car in the air, and really made a big to-do out of this, and it made worldwide headlines. And I was thinking of that today, but then I was thinking, you have to be one of the only people to say that you've parachuted into the Indianapolis Motor Speedway
Twice.
So that's another thing that you, I think Carl rode on one of the Wright brothers airplanes when they had the meet there. So another thing that you and Carl have in common to see it from that location quickly coming towards you.
Yeah, that was so, and it was actually a really cool opportunity that I'm sort of a daredevil anyway, but I don't know that had they asked me ahead of time if I wanted to jump out of an airplane, I probably still would have said yes. But I was driving to work one day, and Susie Elliott, who works on our PR team, called me and said, "Hey, we were sending all of our media members to get a chance to jump out of the plane with the Red Bull Air team and land at the Speedway. And Channel 13's wasn't Dave Calabro, it was Rich, and Rich was going to jump out of the plane, but the legal team at Channel 13 decided that was a bad idea." So Susie said, "Hey, we've got a spot. Do you want to go?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I went over to Eagle Creek and called my wife last minute because I wasn't sure Beth would think it was a really cool idea. And I walk in there, and of course, so I wear a suit and tie. And when they made me president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, if you look at me pre that time, I didn't wear a tie. But when they made me president of the Speedway, I wanted to do something that really paid honor to the Speedway. And I wanted people to know, and I wanted myself to know every day when I got dressed, that I represent the greatest institution in the state of Indiana. Frankly, I think the greatest institution in the world. And I want people to know that I remind myself of that every day. So I said, every time I'm representing the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I'm going to wear a tie. So I show up at Eagle Creek, and I walk in, and the Red Bull guy looks at me, and I say, "Hey, I'm Doug Boles, Speedway. I'm supposed to jump." The guy goes, "Well, are you wearing that?" I said, "Well, what else am I? Do you have something else for me to wear?" I assumed they just had a jumpsuit. So I jumped with the tie on. And we're 10,000 feet above the Speedway looking down, and they've got it's a high wing plane, and they've got the door open, and the guy's yelling at me over the noise. He says, "You see that big jet down there? As soon as that thing goes, they're shutting down the runway there, and we're jumping." I'm like, "No way, man." And so you're strapped on to somebody, except they're behind you. So you have to be the first person to step out. And the guy goes, "Okay, step out." And as I'm putting my foot out, the guy goes, "Stop, stop, stop, stop." I was scared to death. I was fine until then, and then we jumped, and it felt like forever, floating, but watching the Speedway get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then landed, and the team had come out to sort of celebrate with me. It was pretty cool. And then next year I got an opportunity to do it again. I did get in trouble with my wife on that one. She said, "I get the promotion thing, but why push your luck the second time?" But that you're right. It goes back to what Carl Fisher was all about. He was about how do you promote whatever it was he was doing. He was just an unbelievable promoter. You've seen him. I've seen him. The letters he would write to public officials and to influencers of the day to get them to come to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, to get them to come to Miami Beach when he was selling Miami Beach. He was just a relationship person, and he just knew how to build those relationships and sell tickets and sell cars.
Yeah, I mean, he, like his quote, he loved to see the dirt fly, and he loved these projects, and he was, I don't know how his brain worked. It was going 100 miles an hour, and him and James Allison were the best partnership, where Fisher was go, go, go. Allison more the businessman, the astute, kind of reserved person. He would reel him back. And one of the better stories with them was Prestolite, the Sinolene gas company that really made Fisher kind of the money that he needed to, one, build the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but then go on and develop Miami Beach and Montauk Point. It was dangerous. I mean, Fisher, it's about a 3-foot brass cylinder with compressed carbine gas. A gentleman named Percy Avery was he purchased the patent, a French patent, but didn't have the money, and left it out back. And one day Fisher was running late to lunch and said, this guy was like cursing him because it just sat there for 3 weeks. And then he said, "Well, what do you got there?" And the guy said, "You never looked at it." So he explained it. Fisher started seeing the eyes or the wheels turning in his head, and knew how difficult it was. It was almost impossible to drive at night. There was no lights. The roads were terrible. You could get stranded easily. And he took the container to Pop Haynes restaurant at the time, and Allison said, "Let me see this." So Allison went, took that container, very combustible, and he did a test. He went to the Washington Street Bridge, and he threw the container off the bridge onto the rocks below. The idea was if it blew up, they wouldn't invest. But if it didn't, they would. And luckily, it didn't. Now, unfortunately, the factories did blow up a lot. They were crisscrossing the country with factories that went off. They had 2 in downtown Indianapolis before they got kicked out and moved across the street to where now we know is Union Carbide or Praxair, but that was the 1913 factory for Prestolite, and then created Speedway Indiana. So it's amazing to sit there and think of these early days. These 2 guys, along with Wheeler and Newby, building the track, but the 2.5 miles, not only a spectacle, not only the accomplishment that it brings to winners, but all the other development and worldwide attention it gets. It's amazing to think of that.
Yeah, and that's just you think about that every day. I know Joe does too. When you get to go in, and you guys are the caretakers of our history at the museum, and we all think about those stories and how we want to be able to continue that excitement and that passion for doing something new that Carl Fisher had. But it's hard not to walk around the grounds of the Speedway or even around the town of Speedway and not think about, the Allison guys building cars at 10th Street and rolling them up into the gates to compete in the Indianapolis 500 when they needed folks like that, and just how cool it would have been to back in that day and that time. And that, you think about sports today, how many sporting franchises just threaten a local community that either you pay me $1 billion or I'm going to leave. We're stuck here, right? We're not picking the Indianapolis Motor Speedway up and moving it anywhere. And
Fisher tried that.
Yeah,
he tried it once.
He did try and do that. But even though he couldn't have moved the facility, right? You can move the event. And so this morning I had an opportunity to spend an hour with Dario Franchitti we do a little series called Behind the Bricks, where we do kind of fun little videos with folks. So we did one with Dario, and just walking on the front stretch and talking about the history, because he's a student of the history too. And you think about, you're walking, and you do this every day. It's the same width. It's the same location. It's the same banking. For the most part, it's the same 3.2 million bricks underneath the asphalt that was there since 1909. And that's what makes the Indy 500 special. And I don't know if some of you may remember this. Several years ago when NASCAR was here, Mr. France, the racing got really bad at the Speedway with NASCAR. And he said, well, they just need to change the banking and make it better for NASCAR. But that completely changes why the Speedway is so important. Frankly, why it's so important to the NASCAR drivers is because they want to compete on the same track that Ray Hoon competed on. I mean, that's what makes the place so special. And I mean, I wish Carl Fisher could see it 113 years after March of 1909 when they incorporated and decided to do this crazy thing.
Yeah, I mean, it all his accomplishments in that regard, and just to see how this legacy and people are sitting here listening to stories of 110 plus years ago, and walking. Obviously, we get that opportunity every day to walk the grounds, and when we invite people in for the events, you guys do a great job inviting and the hospitality that you provide. But we're lucky enough, and it's easy to stop and not think about this, but we're lucky enough to have landmarks to help with our automotive heritage, whether it's the Stutz building just a few blocks away from here. The city is now revamping the Cole auto plant on Washington down there. The Duesenberg, Fred Duesenberg's house is up there on Fall Creek. So not just factories, but the founders all live up there in Marion University's campus, and Fisher's house, unfortunately, is not there. But Wheeler and Allison's are up there too. But we could do that at the Speedway. We could do that on Main Street Speedway with the Allison Plant 1. But we could also do that in Indianapolis and in South Bend and Auburn, and really live this automotive heritage with this group and just on walking tours, which is pretty amazing too.
Well, I almost on the way over here, I thought maybe it's probably inappropriate, but I'd love to go back. I wanted to go and stop by the Boyle building, A, because it's the history of the Boyle building, but B, because I had beer. And I thought, a couple beers before I get over there, probably be all right, right?
Maybe if they invite us back.
And they've got the Wilbur Shaw beer too, right?
Yeah.
So that's always good. You get the can with Wilbur Shaw on it, and it's always a good day.
Yeah,
that's one of those.
That was another landmark, kind of they help with the Boyle group and really help them set that up. And it's obviously repurposed, but the bones are still there, and you can sit there and you can think of what Mike Boyle or Cotton Henning was thinking, or Wilbur Shaw, who was another just massive force and savior of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It's easy to give all the accolades to Carl and Rickenbacker, but really Wilbur Shaw's trek that he did over 41 to eventually November 1945, when he kind of somewhat brokered that deal between the Holmans and Tony and Rickenbacker. But it's just amazing to sit there and walk through these. And I love seeing the renovation studs. I think that's going to be a great opportunity. What they do with the Cole building will be great, and all the other locations that we have here. We're a bit spoiled, you know, when you think of that.
So I've got a question for you, because you know, one of the cool things for me in my job is I can go in early, watch the sun come up. I can stay late till everybody's gone, walk around the speedway at night in the dark by myself, which you can convince yourself the place is alive and that there's spirits there. I mean, it's a neat place when there are 300,000+ people in there. It's almost an even neater place when there's no one in there. But you sort of get that same experience in the museum. I mean, you have these artifacts, this artwork that competed at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and oftentimes represents some of our greatest heroes. That has to be pretty cool for you to walk down in that basement by yourself and just know that the history of our place sits right in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal, really, to be a steward and to look back and think, you know, how these men and women, you know, tempted fate, and they risked their life for glory and accomplishments. And these items, whether they're Indiana built or not, were the pinnacle of technology of their time. And I think the basement, if they're not walking around the track, they're in the basement. And I've been there long enough that I think I could walk through it without the lights on and not hit anything. But it's just amazing. And one of my goals is to try to make the museum, and along with Joe, who's really spearheaded this project, to make the museum better, to improve the collection phenomenal, improve the collection, improve the experience, you know, whether that's renovation, whether that's position it to the 21st century. And it's a long process, but we're working towards it. And we'd love to, in the meantime, invite people to the museum to check out the various exhibits and other artifacts that we have.
So have we, speaking of going back to Carl and our founders, artifacts, what kind of artifacts do you guys have that are completely related to those four founders? There wasn't a whole lot of.
Yeah, I mean, we have the 1905 Premier, which is my favorite car in the collection. If you haven't seen it, it is nothing but frame rails and a massive engine. It's a 923 cubic inch, air-cooled, hemispherical overhead cam, very high tech for its time. But Fisher, he went overseas to the Gordon Bennett Cup, which was a road race in Europe, the UK, and he was appalled by how the American cars did. And he was quoted as saying that the American cars could go up the hill, or sorry, the European cars could go up the hills quicker than the American cars could go down them. So he was appalled. And he came back to a gentleman who owned a company, George Widely, who owned Premier here in Indianapolis, and said, I want you to build me the biggest, baddest thing you can build. So they built this monster of a car. Now, unfortunately, they had a max weight limit. And the reason for that is you would think if car weighs too heavy, like today, car weighs too heavy, that's hindering the car. That's not hindering anything else. Well, because the engine was most of the weight, that was a way that they could try to regulate the displacement size or the size of the engine. So it was too heavy, so they started hand drilling holes throughout the car, and they drilled over 256 holes in this car. Still too heavy. So it couldn't run in the Vanderbilt Cup in Long Island, which was a qualifier. So Fisher instead ran at our State Fair dirt track, which predates the Speedway. It has its own history too. And he had a handicap race where he raced two other cars. And Fisher was a barnstormer, so he knew how much of a distance to give him before he would pass them and win. But he averaged 57 miles an hour on the dirt. They lined the entire track. They raced at night with Presto Light headlights, so very terrible headlights. So it was almost like, it was better than the candles, but it was not too much better. And in the day, we would consider him today legally blind. He had two bad astigmatisms, and this is about 10 to 15 years before he got his first pair of glasses. So, and he averaged 57 miles an hour on the dirt in that car. So that's my favorite car. But we have some other trophies of that era. We have some documentation that we've come across that we'd love to show from time to time, programs that we have. So it goes back all the way to predating the track. We have the first, I talked to someone earlier, we have the first trophy for the motorcycle race in 1909. So that was something Fisher had his hands on. And that's something that Fisher, he was, with all the promotion, he was promoting one thing. It was never himself. You know, it'd been easy to call it Fisher Motor Speedway or Fisher Highway or Fisher Beach, which there is a Fisher Island down in Florida, but it was not. They did some horse trading, and then the guy named it after him, but he didn't name it himself. And it wasn't about him. And that's, in a way, he's kind of lost to history in that regard, because he wasn't promoting himself. He was promoting whatever the object was, the bicycle shop, the automobile manufacturers, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, things like that.
It's funny, you think about how he was sort of he put something else above himself, even though he was in the spotlight, right? He was doing that, but we've been fortunate in really all of our owners have been that way. Rickenbacker was that way. Tony Hallman was that way for 75 years. So Hallman George family invested in this community, and a lot of times you didn't know it. And I think we're fortunate with Roger Penske. It's the same thing. I mean, Roger Penske isn't doing this because he wants to rename it Penske Motor Speedway. He's doing this because he fell in love with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 1951, and he wants 75 years from now it's still to be successful. And there's a lot of Carl Fisher and Roger that I see every day, and it's interesting to hear him talk about how he feels the weight of having to carry on the history and tradition that started with Carl Fisher. And in a lot of ways, I think had Roger not purchased the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in November of 2019, I don't know that we'd be open today. Roger never stopped. He kept investing. He said, look, if we can't have people here, then let's put $25 million in the facility to make it better for fans when we can have them. I don't know how many times he said, this isn't I'm not doing this to make money next year. This is a long-term legacy thing for me. And I think really we benefited. Carl sort of started that. It wasn't about how much money can I make. He wanted to make the Speedway big. That's really his biggest thing.
Yeah, it wouldn't be financially feasible to after building the track, lay 3.2 million bricks. In some estimates, it costs more than building the track just to lay those. So yeah, I mean, it seems like Roger, the stewardship that he grappled at the time, which unfortunately was a terrible situation, made the best of it, proved the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and it's going to be great. You know, we had a little sneak preview last year with the 500, and it's going to be interesting to be with him, for you to be with him race morning when he can actually see it full, because everyone knows this. The place it comes alive, and when you, from the people that unfortunately never see the race because they're out in the Coke lot too long, or the person that shows up right when the cannon explodes and they watch everything. I mean, the place takes on its own life in a way for those 12 hours or so. And then it's a little depressing on Memorial Day weekend to think we got another year, but the good thing is we have another year until the Indianapolis 500.
So, yeah, that depression for me sets in as soon as the green flag falls. I mean, I love the race, but there's nothing better than the 30 minutes leading up to the race. That moment in time is the greatest. It's better than Christmas. You put everything that you think of as great during the year, it doesn't equal those 30 to 45 minutes leading up to the race. But you talk about Roger, Carl was hands-on in sort of development. Joe Hale knows as much as all of us, Roger is hands-on. I mean, how many times has he gotten, you've said, hey, we want to do X, Y, and Z, and Roger said, well, what about A, B, and C, not X, Y, and Z? I mean, he is just completely into it. But if you think about Roger's 55 years almost experience as an owner at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, 50th anniversary of his first win this year with Mark Donohue in 1972. That car can be seen at the museum. It's one of the coolest cars, I think, in our 113-year history of the Speedway. But he has never, other than maybe as a kid coming in 51 with his dad, he's never experienced the Indy 500 the way all of us experience it. His experience historically has been come from the hotel or the motel when it used to be around, go under the tunnel, stop by my motorhome, stop by the garage, go to the pit box, and then if I win, go to Victory Lane 18 times, and then otherwise go home. So for him, and even pre-race a little bit, while it means something to him, he was always sort of focused on something else. So I actually wrote a white paper for him in last fall, trying to explain to him that the Indy 500 isn't a race. To most of us, it's an event. And there are all these the race is the most important part, don't get me wrong, but there are all these other things that go on to making it so special. And that can be as simple as, my granddad brought my dad brought me, and this is what I do with my kids. This is where we sit. These are our traditions as we go forward, to much more elaborate reasons why we love it. And a lot of our fans, don't watch another race the rest of the year, but they could tell you every single driver and history about the driver in the speedway. But what makes it special are all the other things that take place in and around it. So I was trying to explain to him the stuff he's never seen, the music on Carb Day, the snake pit, what happens in the Coke lot. One of my favorite things to do the night before the 500 is go in the town of Speedway and surprise people in their houses at night, and who are having parties in their garages, or go out in the Coke lot and just talk to people. And it's just so much fun to understand why people come. And Roger's never really seen that. And it's one thing to put on a really cool race. It's another thing to put on a cool event. And I had a guy from Daytona. Well, he was from Orlando, but he was in last year for a convention or something in Indy, and he heard we were having practice. He'd never been to Speedway, came out. Somehow I ran into him in the plaza, and we were talking for a bit. And then we got finished talking, and he said, "I'm just really excited to know that there's another event, that's like the Daytona 500." And I said, "Well, you ought to come back and, sometime come for the race." And as I walked off, I thought, we're not like the Daytona 500. In fact, I don't want to be like the Daytona 500. That's a race. If you want to compare us to another race, it's Monaco or it's Le Mans. It's not Daytona. Don't get me wrong. I love the Daytona 500, but it's not an event. It's a race. And so trying to get Roger behind that. So I can't wait this year to walk him through the things that we all take for granted, what it means to us. And for him to see the grandstands fill up, like you said, to see them full and to see all the different people, that's, to me, I feel our biggest obligation is producing a 300,000 plus person attended event for Roger Penske. And I feel really good that we're going to get that done, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And there's some things he'll struggle with, the trash. It's like why isn't that picked up? Well, we have 300,000 people here, and it's really hard to get the trash trucks here. But it's going to be fun.
Well, I remember obviously when the announcement happened that he purchased the track. He got the trash.
Yeah,
he got the trash along with it. But that was the first thing he said. He said to the staff, he said, "I want people to pick up trash. I want this place to glean."
Yeah.
And it, obviously
we did really well in 2020.
It was
really
spotless.
clean. It looked really good. There was no problems there.
The trash cans look good. Everything, but it is amazing when you think the 500 is the cultural fabric of Indiana, and you can go anywhere. You can talk about football, or a lot of people try to. I know that the football fans want to say the Colts or the Pacers, but it's really the Indianapolis 500. And when you guys invite 300,000 plus people in there, each person has their own experience, and it's easy to think about that as a whole. But then when you think of it individually, that this person has their own experience, they may not even be close to the person sitting next to them with their experience, but it's always something that they come back, they look forward to. The people from across the world that sits around them, it's a big family reunion in a way with strangers, and they want to sit there and bond and sing the stanza to Indiana and watch cars and daredevil drivers attempt to achieve glory. And it's something that's uniquely to the Speedway. It's not a race, because you can go to races almost every weekend depending on the size, but it is something that everyone has. And that's something with our newest exhibit, Traditions. We wanted to capture that, and wanted to talk about things like the yellow shirts, why 500 miles, why the month of May, back home again in Indiana, the Command pace car, all these traditions for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and 500 that we all kind of take for granted, because if anything, 2020 was a bit of a reality check, because it's easy to think, okay, we're going to be, back here. And in a way, I think it made people long for their Indiana home, which was the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in May.
2020 was the absolute worst feeling for somebody that worked at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And so much of the joy I get is talking to customers. So I'll leave here tonight. I'll call 10 customers on my way home, actually on my way to a lacrosse game that my wife is coaching tonight. But it's about the fans. And for as much as all of us can find cars and eras and race car drivers and things that helped build it, it really is sustainable because of the 300,000 plus people who show up every year, who bring their families, who bring their best friends, who go away to college and convince their college buddies to come back to see what they do every Memorial Day Sunday. And then they create these lifelong traditions. And for 2020, to do it without fans, and in fact, we were in St. Pete when the world shut down. and we met sort of for breakfast to figure out what we were going to do. And at that point in time, we were still thinking about running St. Pete without fans because everybody was there. And then the PGA and everybody stopped. So we decided the best thing to do, okay, let's stop and go home and gather again at the Speedway on Monday when we got back home. And at that point in time in 2020, we were like, okay, this is definitely going to pass. Mm-hmm. So let's not, and that's a point in time too where everybody was sort of canceling things right away. And Roger said, let's wait and see what happens. And then as we got further into it, we realized we were going to probably not be able to have something in May. So we said, okay, we move it to August. Certainly a quarter of a year. Yeah, we're going to be in good shape. And we made the mistake internally of saying, can't have the Indy 500 without fans. That's what makes it special. And Roger even publicly said it. And then I went one step further and publicly said that an Indy 500 without fans isn't an Indy 500, it's just another race. We're not going to do that. And then we get faced with the decision of, you're going to have to do this probably, or risk the complete collapse of the IndyCar series. And by that, I mean, the IndyCar series is important, right? It's 14 other races outside of Indianapolis besides the 3 that we have here. But much of the funding that the teams get is built on the backs of the Indianapolis 500. And so sponsors had made commitments. And if we were going to stop the Indianapolis 500 from happening, those teams were likely going to have to give money back. And that means those teams are likely going to shut down. And then that means how many of those teams are going to be around to open up when we're able to go racing again, hopefully in 2021. So we made that really tough call to have an Indy 500 without fans. My tradition has become on qualifying Sunday for the Fast 9 to sit in the grandstands and turn one with the fans and enjoy it with the fans. And it is an absolute blast to sit there in the E&B penthouse with fans going crazy and just being a fan. And I felt so bad about being inside the racetrack when that was happening. I actually went outside and watched the Fast 9 from the gravel parking lot across the street with the hundreds of fans who just wanted to be at the Speedway on qualifying day. And it made me think, okay, this place is going to survive because we all have roots so deep in the Indy 500 and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It goes way beyond the race. It's a tradition that we do that we were going to get through it. But race day 2020 was the scariest thing I think I've ever gone through. I typically don't sleep. People say, what's your race day like? Well, my race day starts on Saturday morning when I wake up Saturday morning, and I don't go back to bed until Sunday night, partially because we're building a snake pit concert stage that's nutty and it takes all night to do. And so I stay in my little camper at the Speedway, and in 2020, sitting out there at 8:30, looking at my wife going, what do we do? And we invited Johnny Rutherford and Donald and my dad and some others, and we cooked burgers out and just sat and told stories about the Indy 500 and how strange that time period was. And I hope we never have to do it again. And last year was a challenge too, right? 135,000 people in the grandstands. I know people, there were more than that. There were more than that. But not a lot more than that, right? And so we're going to have 300,000 plus people in the Speedway this year. People are just because we haven't done it in 3 years, it's going to blow people's mind when they get back to the Speedway and the way it's supposed to be.
I always joked around, I think when people were talking about, there's more. I don't think people remember how cramped you were, when you're sitting with 300,000, right. You can't sprawl out like this.
So we learned a lesson, right? So we spaced people out. So if you saw it from a lens and on the camera and a long lens, it looked like there were tons of people. But if you saw the overhead or you were sitting in a section, you realized that there was some space around you. But as you looked further down, it looked like everything was full, right? And you were in a section that wasn't. So we had 135,000-ish in the stands, and then you had another 10,000 in suites. We probably had 155,000 people in the venue last year. So that's probably an accurate number. But what we learned for the NASCAR race where we don't get 300,000 people, that if you're calling today to buy a NASCAR race ticket, we're spreading you out. So on TV, it's going to look really good this year.
Yeah. They're going to be all over the place.
Yeah.
But so that's interesting. Obviously, you don't sleep the entire 40 hours.
But neither do you. You're making sure cars are going to run.
Yeah.
You're hoping it. I mean, you've got 100-year-old cars you're going to run.
I mean, I at least get a chance to go to Outback on Saturday night. That's my tradition. So if you'll see me at the Outback in Avon, trying to get ready for a good race day. But no, it's great. But obviously, we're looking forward to. Obviously, the museum's open. Will be open the entire month of May. Cars will be on the track tomorrow and Thursday. It's amazing to sit there and think about We're going to invite 300,000 people back. We're going to have the Grand Prix. We're going to have qualifying, all these great things that the Indianapolis 500 is and is coming here just a few weeks. So any last remarks before we turn to some Q&A?
No, I just, like I said, I just appreciate everybody coming out. I appreciate the passion you have for the Speedway. It really is you guys, your families, your friends, whoever introduced you to the Speedway that makes it special. It's why the event works, is because each of us, it's not easy, right? Going to the Indy 500 is not an easy experience. It is a long day. You got to battle traffic to get there. You got to battle traffic to get home. You don't know what the weather's going to be like. How many times have we all stood in the rain? But we do it every year. And it really is that fan experience that makes the Indy 500 what it is. And the drivers will tell you that. They spend their time practicing and qualifying to virtually nobody compared to what happens on race day. And one of the best parts is a guy or gal who's never competed in the Indy 500 to watch them walk out and see their faces on race day. When Kurt Busch came and ran, who, by the way, I was never a Busch fan, but Kurt Busch was unbelievable. He just decided, I'm going to do the Indy 500 and I'm going to do everything you're supposed to do. I want to do the parade. He just embraced the whole experience. And that's, I kind of fell in love with Kurt Busch because of that. And I said, man, you don't get it. And you won't get it until race day. And he goes, oh no, I've done Daytona. I've done, like, no, trust me, you just don't get it. So he runs the 500 and then they ship him off to go do Charlotte. So I didn't get a chance to talk to him. So the victory banquet the next night, I couldn't wait to find him. I said, what do you think? He goes, oh my gosh, it's the coolest thing I've ever done in my life. I thought Daytona was something. He said, you can't explain it. I can't tell you are 100% correct. It's the coolest thing that I've ever done in my life. And I wish everybody could experience it. Now, Jimmy Johnson has seen it from the commentator side. I can't wait for him to see it from the driver's side. It's just so much fun to bring these guys who are unbelievably successful in their own form of racing to bring them to the Speedway. And there is nothing like that energy level. We all feel it, right? Race morning, as it gets closer and closer, just the tension and the energy and that you can't describe it without being there. And then to talk to those guys after they've gone through it, there's a reason Carl Fisher was a great promoter, but there was sort of a foretelling when he called it an international sweepstakes, which it has certainly become. He called it the greatest race course in the world, which is, before it ever had a car on it. And it's certainly become that. And it would be so fun to say, hey, Carl, walk out with us on race morning and watch what this thing's turned into. We've been blessed with great ownership, great visionaries. We've got another one in Roger Penske. I think there's a lot of great things ahead for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And 100 years from now, somebody will be talking about all the cars and the fun that, they'll still talk about Carl, but all the stuff that, that you were involved with making the museum what it is. And by the way, shameless plug, I'm going to do it because they won't. The museum, so there's three entities in Indianapolis that really help promote the Indy 500 beyond the fans. It's the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It's the 500 Festival, it does the parade and the mini marathon, and it's the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. Two of those are 501c3s. And the museum is one of those. The museum tells our story better than any place or anyone else because you can walk in and you can see those cars. You can become a member, and I encourage each of you to do, whether it's $5 or $50,000. You can become a member and help preserve that. They've got a great vision in terms of how they're going to make that museum even better going forward. The assets and the artifacts that are in there are unbelievable. And a lot of people don't know that. They just assume it's part of the Holman George family or part of what Roger's done. It is separate and is something that we obviously are supportive. So see Joe or Jason, they can certainly tell you how you can really become a member to really help us out there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
I thank you for all the time. And like I said, I want to turn it to you guys to give you a chance to ask any questions. I know we wanted to talk about Indiana Auto too, but there's just so much to unpack, especially when we start talking about Carl Fisher and things like that. But
we may have to come back.
Yeah.
So stick around for a little bit.
Yeah.
Here. We're going to have folks come up, but I think I'll just kind of run to you and just booming voice. If you have any questions. One thing I want to follow up. Thank you so much about both today's event for being here tonight. I think one of the stories of stewardship and its place in Indiana history. And I don't know if you know this, but 2022 is the 20-year anniversary of the Indiana Quarter that was released that has an Indy car on it. So on the federal currency, that represents our state, or our state, great name, is the Indianapolis Motor Speedway IndyCar race. Look at your driver's license, a state ID. It's got an IndyCar on the front. So the privately held owners of the track, the stewardship, and all that they've meant for this community, I think, has got a significant lasting impact beyond what we have sometimes realized. So thank you for all your excellent work in keeping the history, present, and future alive for all of us. So with that, questions? Oh, Zoom people. Would you tell Zoom people, because you have a Zoom mic on.
Zoom people.
Submit questions online.
Submit your questions online, Zoom people, and we will try and get to those as well.
Excellent. So I'm going to go first. Okay, great.
Thanks, guys, for coming tonight. I love your story about touch a little bit on
Go ahead, and I'll tell you my go. You go first.
So Wilbur, if Carl built the track, it wouldn't be here. I always joke around. It wouldn't be here without Wilbur. You know, unfortunately, because of World War II, the track sat dormant and it was neglected. You know, the grandstands were starting to collapse. The weeds were growing up through the bricks. It just became very dilapidated. And Wilbur had a chance to test synthetic tires for Firestone. They had a special government permission towards the late part of the war, and saw how just neglected the place became. So then he started a crusade of trying to save the track. And, you know, being a Hoosier native, winning the Indianapolis 500 3 times, it wasn't just for Wilbur to find a suitor, because, you know, you could find someone with the money to buy the track. That's not the easy thing, or that's not the hard thing. The hard thing was finding a suitor that wouldn't use their own personal gain, or whether it be a company, an individual, and not utilize the track in their own gain and really run the speedway and improve the speedway. So after a few attempts to other entities, he was connected with a businessman out of Terre Haute, Tony Holman, and you know, really helped facilitate that deal. And I always joke, if Wilbur wasn't here, I'd probably be at the museum selling you real estate than talking about old cars, because that was pretty much what the writing on the wall was the land was going to be redeveloped in housing without Wilbur. So he's definitely up there on most important people at the Speedway. Obviously was track president for a few years after that, until his untimely passing in the plane accident. But just a great Hoosier hero.
Yeah, and for me, you know, it's hard for a kid who's born and raised in or near Indianapolis, and who fell in love with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, to think that I'm sort of sitting in the same chair that he is. But for me, the tie is partially as much Wilbur and Carl as anybody else, right? It's reminding me every day. You see all the photos of him, you know, the way he really represented the Speedway. But mostly, and Jason touched on a little bit, just his passion for the Speedway and knowing what it meant. You want to make sure that you're carrying on that passion. If you read his book, it's a fascinating book, especially the end where he talks about how he finds Tony Holman, and then the challenge of getting from November of 1945 to May of 1946. And then the challenges Wilbur had were the same challenges we have. I mean, the three most important things to him are probably the three most important things to us. You know, and that was, how do you improve the facility and the fan experience every year? How do you make sure traffic isn't terrible, right? I mean, he was worried about getting people in and getting people out. And then how do you put on an event that allows the teams each year to leave the Speedway and be healthier when they come back the next year? I mean, those were three things that were high on his radar, and they certainly are on ours. So, you know, I think about that every day. It's funny, in Project 100, when we took the roof off the penthouses, and we're adding the 3 new rows and putting the new roof on, and then trying the steel that we put in goes all the way down to the ground to really support the wind load and everything from that roof. And the folks that were doing our work were struggling with some welding issues. The steel wasn't connecting like they thought it would, and they couldn't quite figure it out. So they had a metal guy come in to try and figure that out. And it hit me. I remembered reading in his book, Carl talking about in 1946 after the war, it was so hard to get steel because everybody was building and things were booming. And they ended up with a steel that was more common in the early 1900s than it was in the middle 1900s. And it's steel that I think we use today is more commonly found in hand tools. So the properties were different. And so when we were trying to weld on stuff that Carl had done in 1946, it wasn't working. So even in some of those things, you sit and you go, these guys are still around today. Like walking with Dario around the front stretch, and the track's really cool. All year long because it does different things. So when everything freezes, as we come out of winter and the thaw starts to happen, there are places in the racetrack where there's a bump. There'll be a bump in the early spring that'll be gone by the time we get to May. And Dixon first noticed one in 2017, so we were trying to figure out what it was. And today, walking with Dario, there's one there. And what it was during the 30s. The bricks were beginning to buckle from the freeze and the thaw, and they would go in and they'd take an entire row of bricks out and they'd filled it with asphalt. So still to this day, you'll feel the history of like today, you could feel where the racetrack was raised because it was asphalt and bricks on either side of it. And in a week or so, that it'll be gone as the thaw happens. But those are the times where I go, oh, Carl's still here, Wilbur's still here. I mean, all those guys are still having an influence on the race today just because of that.
Well, and as we're showing, Oil Racing Headquarters project that was led by the Indianapolis Motor Speedway fans. It's done a great job over there to keep that headquarters alive. And that's some nice work over there. So we have that piece of history time still in place. Okay.
One up front here.
This is the best part to see Dave run.
Thank you for the briefing. What's the current status of us having at least 33 cars on the track?
I knew that question was coming up.
Hey,
So believe it or not, there is oh yeah, that's right. For Zoom fans, in case you didn't hear that, the question was about 33 cars for the Indy 5. 33 is just a number. No, that was a joke. I check in with Jay every day. Jay feels really confident that we'll be at 33. There's an outside chance we'll be at 34. So as long as Jay's confident we'll be at 33, I'm confident we'll be at 33. I think it's more than a number. I mean, it's something that is important. We've obviously run Indy 500s with 35 cars. We've run Indy 500s with significantly less than 33 and significantly more than 35. But over most of our lifetimes, 33 has been the number, and there's something really special about that. Would we still have an Indy 500 with 32? Absolutely. Would it be a little bit different? For sure. So the best I can do really is just continue to push on Jay and the team at IndyCar to make sure that they're working towards it. And Jay feels really, really good about it. We had a really cool announcement today. Peretta Autosport is coming back. Unfortunately, not for the 500. She's going to run 4 races with her team later in the year on some road courses with Ed Carpenter. But I think we'll get there. Fingers crossed. But it's a great question. I wish I could announce today that we were at 33.
Well, there was one question that came up online talking about how the buck on the track. Someone asked about the curbing in turn 5.
If any of you watched the NASCAR race last year, or the NASCAR weekend was great. We put these curbs in on the racetrack in 2014 when we redid the infield road course for the 2014 season. And we added a chicane that the IndyCar folks were using. And we did that with a lot of consultations, in particular with Scott Dixon and Tony Kanaan and Connor Daly all had a lot of influence on trying to make the racetrack more racy. And what we ended up doing was eliminating the inner loop, which was what F1 used, and it made it really difficult to pass going to 7. So we put the chicane in, which made a passing zone at 7 in turn 1, actually made the track flow better. The drivers liked it better. It was more competitive. So starting in 2014, that curb's been there. It was fantastic. It was really good through the weekend last year, through the IndyCar race, through the Xfinity race, through Cup practice and qualifying. And then during the Cup race, just before the first stage, one of the cars decided to try and go over it in a different way and got its splitter stuck underneath it. And I knew we were in trouble when I looked out at the TV screen that I was watching as they were prying the curb up a little bit to get the splitter out. Well, prying it up just meant we were opening the gap that the splitter had created. And the Cup cars, unlike the Xfinity cars, actually run on the ground. So that they run them as low as possible. So that splitter is running across the ground when they're at full speed. So they just kept tearing it up, tearing it up, tearing it up. And eventually it exploded. We have, so another side story. So all those crazy turtle curbs that were in there that caused cars to launch, that was something that NASCAR wanted us to do in order to keep cars in bounds, because NASCAR doesn't have electronics on the car that'll say you're out of bounds and penalize them. Where IndyCar, there are timing lines and you've got electronics on your car. If you get out of bounds in IndyCar, they just know, because they don't have to have somebody watch, the electronics tell you. So the NASCAR cars weren't set for that. So they were trying to keep people in bounds. So the curb exploded. And we were told, well, you should have put the curbs in that Charlotte had. Charlotte has these curbs, blah, 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 blah. So I'll finish that story in a minute. So the curbs exploded. We ended up, we did a lot of testing. Roger built a 2-seat Xfinity car, basically, that we had out on track. And we were riding around in it. We were testing different places for it to make sure the racing was good and the speed was good. We talked about opening that chicane up completely. The problem with opening that chicane up completely is you would just transfer the problem of a bottleneck of cars all the way to 7. 7's a 90-degree left-hander with not a lot of runoff, so we didn't want to do that. So we ultimately put the chicane back where it was, but we dug the asphalt out and we put some concrete in, and it's a concrete curb. It's not coming up. It's not coming up, and I think it's going to be great. It's a little more aggressive than some of our other curbs. Doesn't mean they won't run over it, but it isn't going to come up. So I mentioned Charlotte. So we were told we should have put the Charlotte curbs in, and if any of you watched the Roval last fall at Charlotte, their curbs blew up. Mm-hmm. So I shouldn't have, but I'm screaming in my house, Beth, woohoo! The Charlotte curbs are blowing up, yeah. So anyway, I felt a little bit better about that. So I probably shouldn't have. And I called Greg Walter, who I'm a good friend with, who runs the racetrack. I say, hey man, I'm sorry, but I kind of felt relieved that somebody else had the same problem.
Yeah.
You talked about the bricks being in the asphalt, and I noticed on your core sample,
yes,
it's like 18 inches.
Yep.
How does that work? Because the wall would seem like you have to keep adding on the wall. I know they did the Cup cars.
So there is new retaining walls that have been put on the racetrack since then. In fact, a lot of the retaining wall, the last time they did it is, you can see it on the golf course if you're in the infield, that's between holes 7 and 8, that little lake inside there. A lot of that's laid on its side when they put new retaining wall in there. So that has been changed over time. So that is definitely part of it. And then I thought the question was going to be, a lot of people think, well, say, can you tell every year that the asphalt was put down? And what happens is, so when we the last time we redid it was in 2004. So I love to see the post every once in a while about, the only stretch of road in the state of Indiana that doesn't have potholes. So it's been 17, 18 years without potholes, which is amazing. Now I said that, fingers crossed on that too. So where I thought you were going to go is, people often ask, are all the layers there? What happens is we'll go and we'll mill off 1.5 to 4 inches of the asphalt and put new asphalt on there. So you really can't see all the history. Obviously the brick is there and then several of the layers, but otherwise I think we'd be even higher up. So it's one of the things we don't want to do is we don't want to resurface necessarily, because when you resurface, it's not ever as smooth. You have to grind it. The grip level changes. The teams don't like it. So we're trying to do everything we can to keep the surface alive. And that's why we've been doing those core samples, is to understand what the water is doing underneath the racetrack. If you look at the exit of turn 2, and as you're watching TV or if you're out there, you'll see at the exit of turn 2, just by the turn 2 suites, the asphalt's a different color there. And it's a different color there because we've basically ground off the asphalt there as much as we can to keep it level. And for whatever reason, the bricks underneath that portion of the racetrack are moving more than any place else in the racetrack. So we hold our breath every winter, hoping that when we come out that it's not really significant. If you go over it in a passenger car, or even if you ride on the museum bus, you can feel the bumps just a little bit there. But it's funny, at 230 miles an hour, the drivers don't notice it. It doesn't seem to be a problem. But we're at a point where we can't grind anymore, or the grip level would be different there than somewhere else. And that obviously would create a problem, especially at some point in the corner. So we're trying to do everything we can to keep it alive. But when we pull a core sample out, that shows our whole history from the very beginning. It's a magical moment when you get to see that. So we've got 2 of those core samples that exist, and you know, we kind of guard those with our lives.
We have an early one in the museum.
Right.
2004.
Yep.
Right here, so. About a car. One of the interesting cars in the 50s was the car that George Solly and Howard built, the tank, Brian built one. History there.
So the 57, 58 Balon special. So I'm not Donald, so you're not going to get a Donald. Yeah. So spoiler alert. But yeah, no, it's an interesting car because of the fact that Salih pretty much showed up to the Speedway with the intentions of selling that car. He built it over the winter and wanted to sell it, had no buyers. So he decided, okay, I'm going to run it. And with Sam Hanks, who was a popular driver at the time, one of those drivers that obviously at that point he was pretty late in his career. He would eventually retire in Victory Lane, but he ran some stock car stuff, and he didn't quit racing, but he quit racing IndyCar, kind of like Parnelli when he was done with Indy. But so he wins the race. Obviously, it's an interesting car when you look at it because it has at that time 255 Offie, which was the workhorse engine at the time. But what he did was he laid it over on its side, which drastically, or 45 degrees or something like that. So it's at an angle instead of being upright. So it drastically lowered the center of gravity of the car and really spurred a lot of copycats. I think Quinn Epperly would make some cars that were similar. Epperly made the body on that car, but then he would go make his own cars, which wasn't uncommon for them to use their designs, and there's no copyright at the time, I guess you could say that. But and then the car won again with Jimmy Bryant in 1958, and it actually ran. It was another car that ran at Monza in the Race of Two Worlds in 1957. So it was over there on the high bank Monza oval, but really set the stage with the laydown cars. I think Foyt in 1960, I think, ran an Epperly laydown Bow-Sill fast car. So really helped with that kind of low sleek. And then one time we were at obviously I was at the museum, and we had someone, it has the blonde car has a little bit of a fin that goes on the back of the car behind the headrest. And we had someone that was an aerodynamicist there, and they said, that doesn't work. Well, they said something else, but they said that doesn't work at all. It was more probably aesthetic than actually aero or streamline for that little fin behind it. But it's the 50s, and the space age was coming to the Speedway.
The cool thing about those cars, really, and I think a lot of you probably feel the same way. I mean, there's not a more romantic era in our Speedway history than sort of that 50s era as you lead into the rear engine revolution, and just how people could sit in their garage and come up with a crazy idea and build a car and go run the Indy 500. And then you had the rear engine cars. And then the 70s was a little bit like that. There was a lot of crazy, cool looking cars and the change in the cars, but I miss that part of the 500 now, right? I mean, the competition is so cool because everybody basically has the same thing, but you just miss that ingenuity and the creativity and the artwork. You know, you talk about Quinn Epperly. I mean, guys that metal's hammered by hand, right? I mean, and it's perfect. And then the paint and the numbers are put on by hand. It's not a computer or decal somebody sticks on. And those are the cool things that make those cars so special.
Yeah, no, it's and another shameless plug. We just opened a Roadsters to Record exhibit that highlights 1960 to 1972. Opened about 3 weeks ago, and obviously that car kind of predates it, but it highlights all the changes, and that what you'll never see again. Quite frankly, those 12 years really revolutionized the 500, and it's open now. So if you go check out the cars in the next 2 days or during the month of May, make sure you check out Roadsters to Records. Electric vehicles.
So I'm probably not the right guy to answer this because I'm an old dude. If you read Wilbur Shaw's book, I think it's interesting. So one of the first things Wilbur Shaw did as a teenager and in the 19 teens, he was battery salesman. He sold cars powered by batteries, and he did everything he could to lighten the cars. And I think he got a car. He says he got a car to maybe go 50 miles an hour, battery powered. And he said one day he realized that, and this is probably not even politically correct to say anymore, but he said no red-blooded American's is ever going to fall in love with a car that isn't a normally aspirated internal combustion car, right? And while I think probably a lot of us feel that way. There's part of the 500 is the whole sensory overload, right? It's the noise, it's the smell, it's just all of the things that you get to see and experience. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if sometime in our lifetime we see a lot more electrification. I don't know if we're on the cusp of seeing that as in terms of how the cars we're used to. We just had that autonomous challenge at the Speedway, and that sort of started out just a crazy thing. I said at one point in time to the team, I said, Carl Fisher developed this place to test new technology. We got to figure out how we're still doing what Carl wanted. Let's figure out how to test new technology. And we originally started thinking about that it should be battery powered. How do you get through that, so that range anxiety that people have? And then ultimately we decided, let's just stick with what we know, which is an internal combustion engine, and go figure out how you build the computers that sort of drive the car. That created it's a whole other problem. Everybody going, well, it's what? You want to get rid of race car drivers? The first thing that literally, so when Roger Penske bought the Speedway, I was at Texas Motor Speedway for the NASCAR race down there, because I'm a friend with Eddie Gossage. I always love to support his events because he's been such a supporter of IndyCar over the years. So I was down there, and I was getting ready to leave there to go to the SEMA show to announce our autonomous challenge at the SEMA show in Las Vegas. More importantly, it was my anniversary, and my wife was going to meet me there. I get a call at Texas that says, hey, we need you to be home. This is Saturday. We need you to be home Monday morning at 7 o'clock. I said, well, what's up? Well, we can't tell you, but you got to be home at 7 o'clock. I said, look, if you're going to fire me, you can fire me. I want to go to Vegas and see my wife, and then you can turn my computer off, whatever. And they said, no, but we can't tell you yet. You have to be home. So I've called my wife and say, hey, don't get on your plane. I got to come home. My wife says, you getting fired? Well, I'm not. Maybe, I don't know. But I got to come home. And so I get home. I fly home Sunday, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. And we even got to the point of thinking, well, maybe somebody's buying the Speedway. And then so we start, okay, who could it be? Chip Ganassi, John Menard, Roger Penske. So we're starting to get on FlightAware to try and find airplane tail numbers. we're trying to figure the whole thing out. So I get there at 6:30 in the morning. The first person I basically run into when I get off the elevator is Roger. And he says, Mr. Boles, bet you didn't expect to see me here. I said, no, sir, I didn't. So that's all great. The announcement's great. And the evening is about to wind down. The first evening, we've been all over the facility seeing it. And then the next thing, he gets a call from Mario. And the call from Mario is, this autonomous challenge thing is, your guys are trying to get rid of drivers. So then we had to sell Roger on this whole thing, that it's not about getting rid of drivers. It's about continuing to test new technology. Long way to answer your question. Obviously, at some point in time, I think you will see some sort of electric vehicle at the Speedway. I don't know what it is. It's not in the near future. And it's I probably just got, when it happens, they're going to remember I said this somewhere, and I won't be there anymore. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing too, electric vehicles are not new. It's hard to think that way, but going back to Indiana's auto heritage, the Waverly that was mentioned earlier, that was built in Fountain Square, and that was an electric powered car, the Pope Waverlys, when Albert Pope purchased the company and then sold it. But Indianapolis made electric cars at the time. In the early days, it just kind of phased out because petrol was just so cheap, quite frankly, and the infrastructure. But electric cars also were advertised at the time to female drivers. And the reason for that is you didn't have to go and actually crank the car, which was a dangerous thing to begin with. Just think every time you get in your car today and you turn the key or press the button, you have something comes out, it's going to break your wrist or something like that. You don't think, but that was how it was back in the day, and people had slings, they called it a Ford fracture and all this other stuff, but but they had the same problems. They had this infrastructure challenge, and they had this range anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So cities, it was fine, but obviously quickly kind of moved out of the way in steam powered cars too. But kind of with outside of like hybrid and computers, really anything in automotive, it's just kind of a circular momentum. Nothing's really new. Someone tried it, especially when you look at some of the early stuff. Either computers made it more efficient or more practical, or we got to a point where where it could be. And especially like if you go to the museum and look at some of these early cars and see the technology that they were fiddling with hardly any what we would consider formal education, but they were geniuses. It's just amazing to sit there and say, man, they were doing this 110, 115 years ago.
And they're tricking us into up the electric stuff anyway. If you drive a car today and you stop at a stop sign or stop light and your car shuts off, that is it is the beginning of an electric car, right? That's turned your car over to running on electricity. So we are getting there where at some point in time, I'm sure we'll see it. And if you've driven an electric car, you know they got a lot of torque.
Yeah,
They got a whole bunch of
fast.
torque. Yeah.
They're fast.
Well, then this is a great place to stop because we've talked about the past, we've talked about the present, we've talked about the future, now the future's the past, the future's still ahead.
It's a conundrum.
So, I want to talk about next time, and I hope to speak for a couple of moments. If there is any questions we could get to, but thank you all for being here tonight. Thanks for supporting Indiana Automotive. Special thanks for education, Vansickle, and Boles for taking the time with us tonight. And clearly, there's a few things on the very near future happening on their schedule. So our thanks to you both. Appreciate your support. Have a great evening.
Thank you,
guys.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zoom people.